Hello, friends. Chris Corsi here, President of Thrive Today, and I want to welcome you to the Relational Skills in Real Life podcast. Friends, today's topic is an exciting one because we're going to talk about how we parents, teachers, grandparents, adults can teach the children in our life relational skills, especially when they don't understand or care about the value. That's right. This is a fascinating topic. So, we're going to look at some tips and tricks as far as how to pass on relational skills when we have kids that, frankly, they don't want to sit down and do some exercises with you. So we have to get a little more creative on growing and spreading the good stuff. I a little while ago I had the chance to take each of my sons on a trip. They got some daddy time, which was a sort of rite of passage for their maturity. So what a rite of passage is, it's an opportunity to acknowledge that transition when children become adults. And what it does is it conveys God's excitement around this growth and this transformation. This is a big deal because what happens between child and adult stage of maturity is a big deal. So when our children are 12 to 13 years old, it's really meaningful to do some things that acknowledge this transition. And during my time with each of the boys on separate occasions, I shared a lot of stories about what I learned about becoming an adult, what that transition was like for me. I shared a lot of examples of dealing with some of the fears or some of the struggles and challenges of learning to tame cravings and learning to give life and take care of others, not just myself. See, children take care of themselves, adults take care of self and others simultaneously. We learn to go after what's satisfying for me and for you. What's a win here? But I also had an opportunity to take my oldest son on a very meaningful day with some of my friends. We had a bit of a guys' day, so other men in my life that I really admire and respect. I took my son Matthew, and we spent a day with Jim Wilder, Michael Hendricks, my good friend Steve, and what we had was some time where these guys could share stories about what they learned about becoming a man. I basically said, "Hey, I want to hear just what are some of the gold, what are some of the meaningful things that you wish you would have known when you became an adult." So we had a fun day of spending some time together. There was a great fellowship meal, and we just had a really life-giving time for my son Matthew when he was making this transition. So that was a very purposeful thing that we did. But you know what? For many of us, our children aren't in a place, frankly, where they want to learn relational skills or they really care about this process. So we have to do what we like to call incognito mode. And incognito mode is basically where we're practicing skills without our children really knowing or understanding what we're doing. And so we have to get creative on helping our kids to learn relational skills. And in a sense, these skills should be embedded into our character so that we will use the skills in our interactions with our children. And I like Christy Haring's example of learning to hide the vegetables so our kids don't realize they're ingesting vegetables as part of the drink or the meal that they're having, so that our kids still get the nutrients that they need. So incognito mode with relational skills is just helping our children get the relational nutrients they need to thrive. And so a big part of this process really comes down to integrating relational skill training into your life, into your interactions. Just if you think about how children need to be fed, they need to be cared for, they need to be clothed, they need to be loved on. Our kids also need a steady diet of relational skill practice. So this means that they're having the opportunity with our influence and guidance and shepherding to practice relational skills. So just like you learn to brush your teeth, you learn to feed yourself and take care of yourself, we approach relational skills as this is another need. This is a need. Like the human brain needs to learn these skills and what we call the 19 skills. So we approach it as we would teaching our children, our young adults, any important step to take care of themselves. Only here we're equipping them with relational skills. So we can also see this process as a spiritual discipline, just as we would set aside some time for prayer and study and some fasting and worship and solitude and stewardship. we insert some space for relational skill practice. So ultimately, this means that we as the adult have to be spending some time in our own growth, embedding relational skills into the fabric of our character. And when relational skills are embedded in the fabric of our character, we will use them. And in some ways, we'll use them very purposefully with a goal in mind, but we'll also use them when we don't realize we're using them. And this is really the goal here. So, one of the best gifts you give the children in your life, if you want to help them learn relational skills, it's you have to learn relational skills. You have to practice, just like a spiritual discipline. You have to practice and take the time to do this. And over time, what will happen is our children will begin to learn and use these skills as well. So I like to encourage people to pray for your children, pray for your kids, regularly ask God what God sees when he looks at our children. What this does is this loads some of the God side into our mind when we interact with them. So let's say, for example, I have a hard time when my one of my sons gets stuck in a big feeling, right? Maybe it triggers me and I just want him to stop it and just suck it up and get through it. Well, that's not going to help him return to joy. It's only going to create attachment pain. And we don't want to create attachment pain in our children. So part of what I would do is pray for my child and say, well, Lord, what do you see when you look at my son? And what do you see when you look at my son when he gets stuck in his upset? And so what this God sight does is it inspires us and it updates our mind to see some of what God sees. So we see our children from heaven's perspective. This especially helps when we're stuck in enemy mode where we're not in our relational sweet spot. So we also join Jesus in interceding for our children. We listen to what Jesus has to say about how he's talking to the Father on behalf of our children, and we join him in that process. And as parents, teachers, adults, we want to create opportunities for our kids to quiet. So this means we practice quieting. We invite our kids to take a breather, especially when we see that when they've lost their peace in some way. Quieting is something we practice on the good days so that it shows up on the bad days. And we also learn, in addition to quieting, we learn to grow some joy. So we learn to be genuinely glad to be with our kids without overwhelming them. Don't be over the top with your energy, but just genuinely glad to be with them. You genuinely enjoy your children. And this means we learn to live in our faith. We learn to tell stories of joy. We learn to share stories of returning to joy, examples of how we stayed our relational selves, and stories of where we lost our peace and we interacted with God to get our peace back. So these stories are one of the best ways we insert relational skills into our interactions, into our meal time. What stories do is they disarm defensiveness, because what we're doing is I'm sharing a story about me and my experience, my fears, my upset, my joy. And so what it does, it's part of this incognito sharing of relational skills. Children don't become defensive when we might say, hey, you need to do this, that, and the other. Let me share how this worked for me. So stories are also what helps to update our kids' minds about what's happening in our mind. And so one of the best gifts we give our children is to share stories about our process of thinking and reacting. We go into detail about what happened when we were stuck in our anger and how we were able to get back to joy and peace. But we're sharing our thoughts. And so I like to do this, especially when I'm driving and I lose my peace because of maybe some wild driver. I like to walk them through what's happening in my mind. Like, oh, dad just lost his peace. Look at that. I can tell my body's getting tense. I'm shallow breathing. I really am upset at that other driver and I just want to see them punished so they learn their lesson. I share the process and I say, okay, well, Jesus, I'm gonna now talk to Jesus and ask for some help and some peace. So I will walk them through the process and go, wow, would you look at that? Now I have a sense of God's peace and God's presence. I'm starting to feel more relaxed. I feel a little bit of compassion because maybe this other driver's having a bad day, and that would make me feel a little bit sad for them, actually. So I feel like I'm going to pray for this other driver, and I share the process of getting back to joy and peace. And this is really an opportunity to demonstrate our process with them. And kids learn how to deal with stuff when we share the contents of our mind in terms of the process of getting our joy back. So, and when we've lost our peace in some way. And we even notice when our kids look like they lost their peace or they're having a hard time. We can even ask them to say, "Hey, it looks like you're having a hard time. Would it be helpful if I prayed for you right now? Would you like me to pray for you?" We could even lead them in a little interactive prayer of getting connected with Jesus and helping them get relational and sharing minds with Jesus. And we simply walk through that process in very simple ways. Or we can even do some manual journaling with them. We do this a lot with our kids. And we actually do weekly meetings with our kids to check in on these things. And we let them share their goals and we let them talk about what they're working on. And we include their spiritual life. And so we would take the time to do this. Like, this is just an expression of who we are. We're the kind of family that talks to Jesus when we lose our peace. But depending on how old your child is, obviously, if you could do this earlier, the better. But we kind of just work with what they are giving us to work with. Um, but the quieting can be really hard for children with sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen as they reach puberty. If they haven't learned to quiet and calm before they reach about 13, 12, 13 years of life, it will get harder with testosterone and estrogen to quiet. So it's just helpful to know the earlier we can practice some of these habits, the better off we will be. So what we're doing is we're learning to use our relational skills when we interact with our children. We're practicing our skills on a regular basis so that they are woven into our days, into our interactions with our kids. Honestly, one of the best windows for relational skill practice is at meal times, because you actually have a chance, if you could protect a little bit of time for meals, to connect with them, ask them about their day, listen to the parts of their day maybe when they lost their peace or they were in a conflict or something upsetting happened. This is when we practice our return to joy skills. We validate, we comfort, we attune with them. And these brief windows are actually opportunities where they will feel seen, heard, and understood. So we're helping them learn to feel, share, and quiet their upsets. And friends, that's gold. We don't try to fix it, because that's just going to minimize them and that's going to make them feel alone. We listen, we attune, we validate, we comfort. Our kids don't need us to fix our problems unless they're specifically asking. Our kids need to feel seen, heard, and understood. That actually gives them the capacity to navigate the hard stuff. And I hear from a lot of parents of teenagers where late at night is often where the kids are awake and they want to talk. So I've talked to parents who've had to adjust their schedules a little bit where they could, so that they're available during those windows when they can interact with their kids. So even just recognizing when your kids are in a place where they want connection and their attachment light is on, which means they want connection with you, those are opportunities to really help to validate, comfort, and connect. But friends, we all have to check our expectations. Most parents I know have expectations they've placed on themselves or other people have placed on them. And what it's doing is it's robbing their joy, because they feel the weight of the world to try to help their kids learn these skills, and they feel so much pressure. So I just want to say, check your expectations. What expectations do you have for your kids or for your parenting? And where are you losing your joy because you're carrying the weight of the world? This is a good thing to talk to Jesus about. But one of the best things we can also do with our kids is work on our own unprocessed pain and work on doing things out of fear. Our kids will pick up when we're doing things out of fear. They feel it. And so doing things out of fear smothers rather than blesses. And so we don't want to smother our kids. We want to bless them. So don't do things out of fear. And after children are 13 years and older, they're very interested in power, relationships, and truth. So these are three things kids are very focused on. And so how can we foster opportunities for them to learn how to use power fairly and well, learn how to make their relationships work, and learn to be honest, and what is it like when they encounter people who are not honest? And so we have to work really hard on owning the times that we've made mistakes or we've hurt them, because power, relationships, and truth are three things that's going to be very important as they shift into the adult stage of maturity. So we look for opportunities to volunteer. Jen and I have looked for opportunities here locally where we live to volunteer and to serve in a shelter, so that we can interact with others, build some joy with others. But it also gives our kids the opportunity to be life-giving, to be a source of the good stuff. And so these are opportunities to build some joy. And we just continue to try to live in honesty and transparency about our own weaknesses, our own failures, our own mistakes and shortcomings. Like, just own it. with your kids and apologize for it. And that can really go a long way. But it's helpful to know at 13 years of life, the brain develops the capacity for abstract thought. So Jim Wilder would say at 13, the brain develops the capacity for abstract thought, which means now young adults can make decisions and live according to their principles and according to their truth. So helping them identify what's important to them. How do they want to live their life? What kind of impact do they want to have on other people? And big picture, we invite other families into this process. We are not enough as parents. Our kids need more. They need other examples, other parents. They need a diversity of skills. So, getting together with other parents and families to hear their stories and share stories about how they returned to joy, how they overcame some challenges, how they found God's peace where it was missing. These fellowship meals provide a lot of opportunities for our kids to see other examples and modeling what it can look like to return to joy. So, friends, hold on to the reality that a little bit goes a long way as you're practicing relational skills. It's easy to only focus on our deficits and what's missing and what's wrong rather than what's going well. So have other parents you can connect with or other adults you can connect with. And anytime you feel overwhelmed, just notice it when you lose your peace and work on getting back to joy and peace. And just keeping in mind transformations from one stage to another stage is really hard as our children become adults. So just getting the resources and recognizing this and being honest about our shortcomings can go a long way with our kids. So as you learn relational skills, you know what? You're going to use those skills. So at the end of the day, you practice, you grow, and you develop those skills, and that will spill over into your interactions with your kids. Friends, we've got a great webinar called Switched On for Joy about this great book that Heather and I wrote. And I just want to encourage you, that's going to be a great resource, especially for younger kids. Marcus Warner and I wrote the 4 Habits of Raising Joy-Filled Kids. I wrote the Joy Switch book, How to Live Relationally. So these could be some really good resources. But at the end of the day, a little bit of joy and peace goes a long way.